Bhima's meeting on his way in a grove of bananas with Hanuman, the son of Pavana of great prowess. Bhima's bath in the tank and the destruction of the flowers therein for obtaining the sweet-scented flower. He was in search of his consequent battle with the mighty Rakshas and the Yakshas of great prowess, including Hanuman, the destruction of the Asura Jeta by Bhima, the meeting of the Pandavas with the royal sage Vrishaparva, their departure for the asylum of Arshtashina and abode therein, the incitement of Bhima to acts of vengeance by Draupadi. Then is narrated the ascent on the hills of Kailasa by Bhimasena, his terrific battle with the mighty Yakshas headed by Hanuman, then the meeting of the Pandavas with Vaisravana, Kuvera, and the meeting with Arjuna after he had obtained for the purpose of Yudhishthira many celestial weapons. Then, Arjuna's terrible encounter with the Nivatakavakas dwelling in Hiranyaparva, and also with the Palomas and the Kalakayas, their destruction at the hands of Arjuna, the commencement of the display of the celestial weapons by Arjuna before Yudhishthira, the prevention of the same by Narada, the descent of the Pandavas from Gandhamadana, the seizure of Bhima in the forest by a mighty serpent huge as the mountain, his release from the coils of the snake upon Yudhishthira's answering certain questions, the return of the Pandavas to the Kamyaka woods. Here is described the reappearance of Vasudeva to see the mighty sons of Pandu, the arrival of Markandeya, and various recitals. The history of Prithu, the son of Vina, recited by the great Rishi, the stories of Saraswati, and the Rishitarkya. After these is the story of Matsya, other old stories recited by Markandeya, the stories of Indradyumna and Dundumara, then the history of the chaste wife, the history of Anjira, the meeting and conversation of Draupadi and Satyabhama, the return of the Pandavas to the forest of Dwaita, procession to see the calves and the captivity of Duryodhana, and when the wretch was being carried off, his rescue by Arjuna. Here is Yudhishthira's dream of the deer, then the re-entry of the Pandavas into the Kamyaka forest. Here also is the long story of Vrihidramnika. Here also is recited the story of Durvasa, then the abduction by Jayadratha of Draupadi from the asylum, the pursuit of the ravisher by Bhima Swift as the heir and the ill-shaving of Jayadratha's crown at Bhima's hand. Here is the long history of Rama, in which is shown how Rama by his prowess slew Ravana in battle. Here also is narrated the story of Savitri, then Karna's deprivation by Indra of his earrings, then the presentation to Karna by the gratified Indra of a Saktai, missile weapon, which had the virtue of killing only one person against whom it might be hurled. Then the story called Aranya, in which Dharma, the god of justice, gave advice to his son, Yudhishthira, in which, besides, is recited how the Pandavas, after having obtained a boon, went towards the west. These are all included in the third parva, called Aranyaka, consisting of 269 sections. The number of slokas is 11,664. The extensive parva that comes next is called Virata. The Pandavas arriving at the dominions of Virata saw in a cemetery on the outskirts of the city a large shami tree whereon they kept their weapons. Here hath been recited their entry into the city and their stay there in disguise. Then the slaying by Bhima of the wicked Kichaka who, senseless with lust, had sought Draupadi, the appointment by Prince Duryodhana of clever spies, and their dispatch to all sides for tracing the Pandavas, the failure of these to discover the mighty sons of Pandu, the first seizure of Varitras, Kain by the Trigartas, and the terrific battle that ensued, the capture of Vairata by the enemy, and his rescue by Bhimasena, the release also of the Kain by the Pandava, Bhima, the seizure of Vairata's Kain. Again by the Kurus, the defeat in battle of all the Kurus by the single-handed Arjuna, the release of the king's Kain, the bestowal by Virata of his daughter, Uttara, for Arjuna's acceptance on behalf of his son by Subhadra of Himanyu, the destroyer of foe. These are the contents of the extensive fourth parva, the Virata. The great Rishi Vyasa has composed in these 67 sections. The number of slokas is 2050. Listen then to the contents of the fifth parva, which must be known as Yuddha Yoga. While the Pandavas, desirous of victory, were residing in the place called Upaplavya, Duryodhana and Arjuna both went at the same time to Vasudeva and said, "You should render us assistance in this war." The high-souled Krishna, upon these words being uttered, replied, "O ye first of men, a counselor in myself, who will not fight, and one Akshauhini of troops, which of these shall I give to which of you?" Blind to his own interests, the foolish Duryodhana asked for the troops, while Arjuna solicited Krishna as an unfighting counselor. Then is described how, when the king of Madra was coming for the assistance of the Pandavas, Duryodhana, having deceived him on the way by presents and hospitality, induced him to grant a boon, and then solicited his assistance in battle. How Salya, having passed his word to Duryodhana, went to the Pandavas and consoled them by reciting the history of Indra's victory. Then comes the dispatch by the Pandavas of their Purohita, priest, to the Kauravas. Then is described how King Dhritarashtra, of great prowess, having heard the word of the Purohita of the Pandavas and the story of Indra's victory, decided upon sending his Purohita and ultimately dispatched Sanjaya as envoy to the Pandavas from desire for peace. Here hath been described the sleeplessness of Dhritarashtra from anxiety upon hearing all about the Pandavas and their friends, Vasudeva and others. It was on this occasion that Vidura addressed to the wise King Dhritarashtra various counsels that were full of wisdom. It was here also that Sanat Sujata recited to the anxious and sorrowing monarch the excellent truths of spiritual philosophy. On the next morning, Sanjaya spoke in the court of the king of the identity of Vasudeva and Arjuna. It was then that the illustrious Krishna, moved by kindness and a desire for peace, went himself to the Kaurava capital, Hastinapura, for bringing about peace. Then comes the rejection by Prince Duryodhana of the embassy of Krishna, who had come to solicit peace for the benefit of both parties. Here hath been recited the story of Damvodvava, then the story of the high-souled Matuli's search for a husband for his daughter, then the history of the great sage Galava, then the story of the training and discipline of the son of Vidula, then the exhibition by Krishna before the assembled Rajas of his yoga powers upon learning the evil counsels of Duryodhana and Karna, then Krishna's taking Karna in his chariot and his tendering to him of advice, and Karna's rejection of the same from pride. Then the return of Krishna, the chastiser of enemies from Hastinapura to Upaplavya, and his narration to the Pandavas of all that had happened. It was then that those oppressors of foes, the Pandavas, having heard all and consulted properly with each other, made every preparation for war. Then comes the march from Hastinapura for battle of foot soldiers, horses, charioteers, and elephants. Then the tale of the troops by both parties. Then the dispatch by Prince Duryodhana of Uluka as envoy to the Pandavas on the day previous to the battle. Then the tale of charioteers of different classes. Then the story of Amba. These all have been described in the fifth parva, called Udyoga of the Mahabharata, abounding with incidents appertaining to war and peace. O yes, ascetics, the great Vyasa hath composed 186 sections in this parva. The number of slokas also composed in this by the great Rishi is 6,000 698. Then is recited the Bhishma Parva, replete with wonderful incidents. In this hath been narrated by Sanjaya the formation of the region known as Jambu. Here hath been described the great depression of Yudhishthira's army, and also a fierce fight for 10 successive days. In this, the high-souled Vasudeva, by reasons based on the philosophy of final release, drove away Arjuna's compunction, springing from the latter's regard for his kindred, whom he was on the eve of slaying. In this, the magnanimous Krishna, attentive to the welfare of Yudhishthira, seeing the loss inflicted on the Pandava army, descended swiftly from his chariot himself and ran with dauntless breast, his driving whip in hand, to effect the death of Bhishma. In this, Krishna also smote with piercing words Arjuna, the bearer of the Gandhava and the foremost in battle among all wielders of weapons. In this, the foremost of bowmen, Arjuna, placing Shikandin before him and piercing Bhishma with his sharpest arrows, felled him from his chariot. In this, Bhishma lay stretched on his bed of arrows. This extensive parva is known as the 6th in the Bharata. In this have been composed 117 sections. The number of slokas is 5,884, as told by Vyasa conversant with the Vedas. Then is recited the wonderful parva called Drona, full of incidents. First comes the installation in the command of the army of the great instructor in arms, Dronan, then the vow made by that great master of weapons of seizing the wise Yudhishthira in battle to please Duryodhana. Then the retreat of Arjuna from the field before the Sansaptakas. Then the overthrow of Bhagadatta, like to a second Indra, in the field with the elephant Supratika by Arjuna. Then the death of the hero Abhimanyu in his teens, alone and unsupported, at the hands of many Maharathas, including Jayadratha. Then after the death of Abhimanyu, the destruction by Arjuna in battle of 7 Akshohinis of troops, and then of Jayadratha, then the entry by Bhyama of mighty arms and by that foremost of warriors in chariot, Satyaka, into the Kaurava, ranks impenetrable even to the gods, in Tai. Search of Arjuna in obedience to the orders of Yudhishthira, and the destruction of the remnant of the Sansaptakas. In the Drona Parva is the death of Alambusha, of Srutayus, of Jalasandha, of Somadatta, of Virata, of the great warrior in chariot Drupada, of Ghatotkacha and others. In this Parva, as Wataman, excited beyond measure at the fall of his father in battle, discharged the terrible weapon Narayana. Then the glory of Rudra in connection with the burning of the 3 cities. Then the arrival of Vyasa and recital by him of the glory of Krishna and Arjuna. This is the great 7th Parva of the Bharata, in which all the heroic chiefs and princes mentioned were sent to their account. The number of sections in this is 170. The number of slokas as composed in the Drona Parva by Rishi Vyasa, the son of Parasara and the possessor of true knowledge, after much meditation, is 8,909. Then comes the most wonderful Parva called Karna. In this is narrated the appointment of the wise king of Madra as Karna's charioteer. Then the history of the fall of the Asura Tripura. Then the application to each other by Karna and Salya of harsh words on their setting out for the field. Then the story of the swan and the crow recited in insulting allusion. Then the death of Pandya at the hands of the high-souled Aswataman. Then the death of Dandasena. Yudhishthira's imminent risk in single combat with Karna in the presence of all the warriors. Then the mutual wrath of Yudhishthira and Arjuna. Then Krishna's pacification of Arjuna. In this Parva, Bhima, in fulfillment of his vow, having ripped open Dasasana's breast in battle, drank the blood of his heart. Then Arjuna slew the great Karna in single combat. Readers of the Bharata call this the 8th Parva. The number of sections in this is 69, and the number of slokas is 4,962. Then hath been recited the wonderful Parva called Salya. After all the great warriors had been slain, the king of Madra became the leader of the Kaurava army. The encounters, one after another, of charioteers have been here described. Then comes the fall of the great Salya at the hands of Yudhishthira, the just. Here also is the death of Sakuni in battle at the hands of Sahadeva. Upon only a small remnant of the troops remaining alive, after the immense slaughter, Duryodhana went to the lake and creating for himself room within its waters, lay stretched there for some time. Then is narrated the receipt of this intelligence by Bhima from the fowlers. Then is narrated how, moved by the insulting speeches of the intelligent Yudhishthira, Duryodhana, ever unable to bear affronts, came out of the waters. Then comes the encounter with clubs between Duryodhana and Bhima. Then the arrival, at the time of such encounter, of Balarama. Then is described the sacredness of the Saraswati. Then the progress of the encounter with clubs. Then the fracture of Duryodhana's thighs in battle by Bhimbo with a terrific hurl of his mace. These all have been described in the wonderful 9th Parva. In this, the number of sections is 59, and the number of slokas composed by the great Vyasa, the spreader of the fame of the Kauravas, is 3,220. Then shall I describe the Parva called Saptaka of frightful incidents. On the Pandavas having gone away, the mighty charioteers, Kritavarman, Kripa, and the son of Drona came to the field of battle in the evening, and there saw King Duryodhana lying on the ground, his thighs broken, and himself covered with blood. Then the great charioteer, the son of Drona, of terrible wrath, vowed without killing all the Panchalas, including Drishtadyumna, and the Pandavas, also with all their allies, I will not take off armor. Having spoken those words, the 3 warriors, leaving Duryodhana's side, entered the great forest just as the sun was setting. While sitting under a large banyan tree in the night, they saw an owl killing numerous crows, one after another. At the sight of this, Aswathaman, his heart full of rage at the thought of his father's fate, resolved to slay the slumbering Panchalas. And wending to the gate of the camp, he saw there a Rakshasa of frightful visage, his head reaching to the very heavens, guarding the entrance. And seeing that Rakshasa obstructing all his weapons, the son of Drona speedily pacified by worship the 3-eyed Rudra. And then, accompanied by Kritavarman and Kripa, he slew all the sons of Draupadi, all the Panchalas with Drishtadyumna and others, together with their relatives, slumbering unsuspectingly in the night. All perished on that fatal night, except the 5 Pandavas and the great warrior Satyaki. Those escaped, owing to Krishna's counsels. Then the charioteer of Drishtadyumna brought to the Pandavas intelligence of the slaughter of the slumbering Panchalas by the son of Drona. Then Draupadi, distressed at the death of her sons and brothers and father, sat before her lords, resolved to kill herself by fasting. Then Bhima, of terrible prowess, moved by the words of Draupadi, resolved to please her, and speedily taking up his mace, followed in wrath the son of his preceptor in arms. The son of Drona, from fear of Bhimasena, and impelled by the fates, and moved also by anger, discharged a celestial weapon, saying, This is for the destruction of all the Pandavas, then Krishna saying, "This shall not be neutralized," Aswathaman's speech. Then Arjuna neutralized that weapon by one of his own. Seeing the wicked Aswathaman's destructive intentions, Dwaipayana and Krishna pronounced curses on him, which the latter returned. Pandava then deprived the mighty warrior in chariot Aswathaman of the jewel on his head, and became exceedingly glad, and, boastful of their success, made a present of it to the sorrowing Draupadi. Thus, the 10th Parva, called Saptaka, is recited. The great Vyasa hath composed this in 18 sections. The number of slokas also composed in this by the great reciter of sacred truths is 870. In this, Parva has been put together by the great Rishi, the 2 Parvas called Saptika and Aishika. After this hath been recited, highly pathetic Parva called Stri, Dhritarashtra of prophetic eye, afflicted at the death of his children, and moved by enmity towards Bhima, broke into pieces a statue of hard iron deftly placed before him by Krishna as substitute of Bhima. Then Vidura, removing the distressed Dhritarashtra's affection for worldly things by reasons pointing to final release, consoled that wise monarch. Then hath been described the wending of the distressed Dhritarashtra, accompanied by the ladies of his house, to the field of battle of the Kauravas. Here follow the pathetic wailings of the wives of the slain heroes. Then the wrath of Gandhari and Dhritarashtra and their loss of consciousness. Then the Kshatriya ladies saw those heroes, their unreturning sons, brothers, and fathers, lying dead on the field. Then the pacification by Krishna of the wrath of Gandhari, distressed at the death of her sons and grandsons. Then the cremation of the bodies of the deceased Rajas, with due rites by that monarch, Yudhishthira, of great wisdom, and the foremost also of all virtuous men. Then upon the presentation of water of the manes of the deceased princes, having commenced, the story of Kunti's acknowledgement of Karna as her son born in secret. Those have all been described by the great Rishi Vyasa in the highly pathetic 11th Parva. Its perusal moveth every feeling heart with sorrow, and even draweth tears from the eyes. The number of sections composed is 27. The number of slokas is 775,